Welcome back, guys. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about the Appalachian Mountains. These encounters will make you think twice about wandering too deep into the mountains. But before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now let's start. My cousin Aiden had just finished building a cabin way out in the Appalachian Mountains, somewhere in western North Carolina, about 20 miles from the nearest speck on the map. Even calling it a town felt generous. It had a post office, a gas station with one pump, and a diner that closed at 4. That was about it. No cell reception past a certain point, no power lines once you left the highway, and definitely no Wi-Fi. Just forest. Nothing but trees and hills in every direction. Aiden had gone through a messy divorce the year before, and he sort of snapped in a quiet way. One day he just announced he was done with cities, with traffic, with bills, with people. Said he wanted to live close to the bone. That was the kind of thing he said when he'd made up his mind. He bought a patch of forest, taught himself to build with his hands, and vanished for 6 months. The next I heard, he'd put up a cabin himself. Off-grid, solar-powered, wood-heated. The whole thing. When it was done, he offered it to me for a week. Said he'd be out of state for work and figured I could use the time to write or clear my head. I hadn't told him I needed to clear anything, but I guess it showed. I made the drive on a Tuesday morning. It was a clear day, not too hot, and the kind of quiet that starts pressing on your ears the farther you get from people. The road narrowed gradually. Asphalt gave way to gravel. Gravel turned into dirt. Eventually, I found myself crawling along a rut-ridden trail barely wide enough for my car. At a certain point, I gave up, parked in a grassy clearing, and hiked the rest of the way. A duffel over one shoulder, a cooler banging against my leg. The cabin was tucked into the hillside, like it was hiding. The front porch looked out over a steep drop into a hollow thick with trees. The back was so close to the slope you could reach out a window and touch the undergrowth. It wasn't big, but it looked solid. Hand-cut siding, a deep porch with 2 chairs. A big iron stove smack in the middle of the main room. Inside was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, just quiet. That weird, pressing silence that settles in when there's no hum of electricity, no fridge, no AC, no Wi-Fi router clicking. Just air and wood and your own breathing. Aiden had left a note on the counter, scribbled in Sharpie on a folded piece of notebook paper. Try the trail behind the fire pit. It leads to a stream. No one out here but deer and ghosts. Enjoy the quiet. That was it. I stood there for a second holding the note, listening to the silence. The first day passed slowly. I didn't even open my laptop. My brain was too loud at first, like it was trying to fill the silence with every thought I'd been pushing down. Eventually, I gave up trying to be productive and just wandered. Built a fire in the stove, made pouch chili. Saturday on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the trees shift from green to black as night fell. I went to bed early, just to escape the quiet. By the second day, my body had caught up with my brain. I slept late, probably the first deep sleep I'd had in months, and didn't feel guilty about it. Made coffee on the little propane burner Aiden had left. Curled up on the floor by the stove. Read for hours. It felt like time moved slower up there. Like the clock was just a suggestion. By the time the sun started dipping, I was itching to move. I threw on my jacket and stepped outside. The air had that crisp, piney bite to it, clean in a way you only notice when you've lived too long surrounded by traffic and air conditioning. The trail behind the fire pit wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it. It started as a soft dip in the brush, just a slightly darker path where the undergrowth had been walked down. No markers, no signs, no blaze marks on trees, just that gentle curve disappearing into the woods. I figured I'd follow it for a bit, see the stream, then loop back before it got too dark. The farther I walked, the quieter it got, and not just from going deeper into the woods. It was like the trees themselves were swallowing the sound. Even my footsteps felt muffled after a while. The trail narrowed until I had to duck under low-hanging branches and step over broken limbs, some of which looked freshly fallen. That's when I saw them. Two men, maybe 300 feet off to my left, just standing in a shallow dip in the brush. They weren't moving, their backs slightly hunched, heads tilted forward. From a distance, it looked like they were staring at something on the ground. Except they weren't moving. At all. I stopped and just stared. No orange vests, no gear. Definitely not hunters. They didn't look like campers either. No backpacks, no water bottles, just standing there, completely still, heads angled toward the dirt. I kept moving, casual, steady. Not fast, not sneaky. Eyes on the trail. Walk. I glanced back once. They hadn't moved an inch. I told myself they were locals, or hikers, or just some guys doing something weird I didn't want to know about. Maybe they were tripping. Maybe they didn't see me. The brain will do whatever it can to make something strange feel normal. The trail kept going. I expected it to loop after a while, curve back toward the cabin, but it didn't. It just went deeper, narrower, darker. Trees growing denser until the light barely trickled through. I'd gone too far. That's when I heard the scream. It sliced through the woods like it didn't care about direction or origin. Shrill and low at the same time, like a siren underwater. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound like any animal either. The closest I can describe is this warped, metallic noise, like a speaker tearing itself apart. I stopped. My heart pounded. I turned slowly, and they were on the trail behind me now, closer. Maybe 150 feet, same posture, same dead stillness. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew they were looking at me. I could feel it. The scream hadn't come from them. I knew that. It had come from everywhere. From the trees, the dirt, the air. We stared at each other, or at least I stared at them for what felt like a long time. Then, at the exact same moment, they both stepped backward into the woods, not turning, just moving straight back, like they were on invisible tracks. And then they were gone. No sound. No crack of a twig, just gone. I didn't run, but I walked fast. The trail suddenly felt different, longer, tighter, like the woods were leaning in around me. Every shadow looked like it could hold a face. Every turn felt like a trap. I kept expecting them to reappear, maybe closer this time. They didn't. When the cabin came into view, I nearly lost it. Slammed the door shut, locked it, stood in the middle of the room just listening. Nothing. I didn't call Aiden. Didn't even think about it. What would I say? Hey, some guys in the woods moved weird? I threw more wood into the stove, made tea, told myself it was just locals messing around. A prank. A coincidence. That scream, though, that stayed in my bones. About 30 minutes passed. I started to relax. Picked up my book again, got a few pages in, almost convinced myself I'd imagined most of it. Then it came again. That same scream. Distant this time, but unmistakable. Like something enormous twisting inside the trees. I stood up, walked to the back window, peeked out. Nothing but black trees. The trail swallowed in shadow. I let the curtain fall, tried to search online every combo I could think of. Appalachian scream, weird animal sounds, forest siren noise. I listened to clips of mountain lions, owls, coyotes, all of them wrong, too high-pitched, too familiar. Then came the footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate. Boards creaking under boots. They stopped right outside the front door. I didn't move. Then a knock. Soft. Careful. I stood frozen. Then another knock. Slower. Heavier. Like whoever was out there wanted me to know they weren't in a hurry. I edged toward the door, leaned in, looked through the peephole. Two figures. Same size, same build. Now wearing plastic animal masks. Crude ones, cheap Halloween junk. One shaped like a deer, the other something rounder. A rabbit maybe. white elastic bands stretched across the backs of their heads. Hoods up. They didn't move. I backed away, looked at my phone, still no signal. Grabbed the iron poker from beside the stove and crouched behind the couch. Then something hit the door. Hard. Just once. A deep, splintering sound that echoed through the floor. Then, silence. I stayed frozen, listening. Eventually, the footsteps started again, retreating. When I dared to peek, they were walking back into the woods, slowly, calmly, disappearing down the trail like it belonged to them. I didn't sleep that night. As soon as the sun came up, I grabbed my stuff and left. Hiked out, didn't look back. Drove until the bars came back on my phone. I had a dozen missed calls. Aiden had tried to reach me twice. When I told him what happened, he was quiet. Then he asked, "Which trail?" I told him. He let out a long breath. "I never cleared that one all the way," he said. "Didn't go more than halfway myself." He sold the cabin a few months later, claimed it was too much to maintain. But I heard something in his voice, something that said he'd seen something too. I grew up in a cramped downtown apartment in Ironbridge, where every car horn and dog bark seeped through thin walls. Out here, there was nothing but the crunch of gravel trails underfoot, the sigh of wind steering through branches, and the ache of long hikes. I thought solitude was exactly what I needed, until I wasn't so sure. The trail to my cabin started 2 miles down from the ranger station. It wound along a gentle slope, trees bending overhead, shading the switchbacks in green. I walked that path every day, same distance, same landmarks. An oak with a split trunk that looked like a cracked open book, a mossy log sagging beside a creek that burbled quietly, an old stone fire pit ringed with flat rocks someone had arranged ages ago. They were small markers, but after a week, I didn't even need to look. My boots settled into the familiar rhythm. The trail felt predictable, comforting in the way routine does. Then, one evening, everything shifted. I signed off at the station as dusk fell on Wednesday, August 6th, and tucked my worn logbook into my pack before heading out as usual. The air hung still. The forest hushed. I walked in steady rhythm, left, right, left. But when I glanced at my watch partway through the walk, my chest tightened. The little numbers glared back, 90 minutes. I should have reached the cabin 40 minutes ago. My legs burned, not from climbing, but from steps taken too many times, like I'd been going in circles on a treadmill. The trail didn't look different. I passed the same oak, the same log, the same fire pit, and yet the walk just kept stretching. My boots kept crunching, the forest kept enveloping me, but the end never came. My mind spun, anxious and confused. Was I lost? Was the trail shifting behind me? When the cabin finally emerged, wooden siding tucked into the slope, windows dark, porch dim, I felt relief flood me, only to drain away just as quickly. Something looked off. I stopped a few feet from the steps and stared. I'd helped measure and cut those boards 2 weeks earlier. They'd been laid in straight lines, snug and uniform. Now one step sagged at a slant, shorter than the rest. The nails protruded at odd, careless angles, rust showing around the heads. Whoever or whatever had done it hadn't cared about precision. It looked slapped together, hurried. My throat tightened. I walked inside, dropped my pack on the table, and froze. The logbook. It wasn't there. I unzipped every compartment, checked the lining, tipped the bag upside down. My fingers trembled. Nothing. I glanced over my shoulder, and there it was, sitting calmly on the shelf by the wall. Clean, closed, as if it had always belonged. A single pine needle lay across its cover, delicate and out of place. I hadn't left it there. The front door thunked shut behind me. I must have locked it without thinking. I turned and saw the book again, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I opened it and felt a shiver inside. The handwriting was eerily familiar. Mine, but off. Letters slanted wrong. shapes slightly crooked, like someone had studied my handwriting and tried to mimic it without fully understanding. The entry mirrored my walk from the station almost word for word, but the times were wrong. It said I left at 4 o'clock. I'd left closer to 7:15 as dusk descended. It even noted a rest by the split oak. I hadn't stopped once. I snapped the book shut, locked the door, something I'd never done before, and crossed to the back room. The window there sat unlatched. My stomach dropped. I don't leave that open. I closed it, then sat down on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle around me. My pulse slowed. Rational thoughts tried to return. Maybe fatigue made me misremember. Maybe I'd been half asleep as I walked. But I didn't fall asleep. Midnight came and went. Then I heard it. A heavy knock, single, solid, deliberate at the door. Not panicked, not casual, purposeful. My heart lurched. I froze. Minutes passed. Then a second knock. Same weight. Same intent. Then a third. After another long pause. All evenly spaced. All exactly the same. It wasn't someone in trouble. I've helped stranded hikers before. Their knocks are scattered, urgent. These were slow, measured. Like whoever was outside didn't need me to open. Maybe they just wanted me to know they were there. I didn't move at first. Then something in me shifted. I pulled the hatchet off the bedside table, its weathered wood handle cool in my palm. Heart hammering, I crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the deck, fading into the forest darkness. I yanked the door open, hatchet raised. The clearing was empty. No one on the porch. No figure disappearing into the trees. I leaned outside, scanning the blackness. Not a rustle, not a footstep. I stooped and checked the ground. No tracks on the porch step. It looked untouched, as though the person who had knocked never entered. I shoved the table against the door and sat down, clutching the axe. Every creak in the cabin walls sounded like a footstep. Every groan from the wood made me flinch. I stared at the door, waiting for it to come again. But nothing did. Dawn came, pale and quiet. I pushed the barricade away, opened the door. Something had changed. The ground looked different now. There were prints. Big, bare footprints pressed deep into the dirt. No treads, no shoe marks. It looked like someone heavy and barefoot had stood there for hours, just inches from the door. I followed them a few steps out, 10 total, then they stopped. No traces into the trees. Nothing. It looked like the person vanished into thin air, partway along the trail. I didn't wait to think about it. I didn't solve the shift in step, the misspelled entries, the crooked boards. I just grabbed my pack, slung it over my shoulder, locked the cabin door out of reflex, and headed straight for the station. The trail still wound beneath the trees, but each crunch echoed louder, reminding me I was not alone anymore, and maybe never had been. I walked until I reached the station. I set my pack down and tried to act normal, but normal was gone. I haven't been back to that cabin since, and I don't think I ever will. I was working a seasonal ranger job out in a fairly remote pocket of the Appalachian Mountains. Most days were quiet. I cleared fallen limbs from trails. I checked that campers were following fire regulations. I jotted down any wildlife my shift brought into sight. Simple routines, and honestly, I liked that comfort. That evening, I wrapped up early. I felt worn out and ready to be done. So I decided to take a shortcut on an old service trail instead of hiking the main fire road back to my truck. It was barely on any map anymore, just a skinny ribbon of dirt, overgrown at the edges and partly hidden by moss and pine needles, a corridor remembered only by older rangers from decades ago. I'd taken it once or twice before without trouble. It cut my time by maybe a third, though I only ever estimated. I just wanted my boots off, some coffee, anything but the quiet dust on that gravel road. The first stretch went on autopilot. My boots tapped, scuffing dirt that smelled faintly of damp pine. I recognized the landmarks. This trail didn't require much attention. There was that mossy root that curled up like a warped spiral, the stream that slipped across the path, that cluster of stones that looked like funny little stairs someone had arranged. I felt steady, no big deal. But then, without warning, I caught sight of something that made me stop cold. A cabin. Not something falling to pieces. Not an old deer stand or a ratty shack. This was proper. Gray bleached logs forming a small house. A roof patched with rusted tin. A porch sagging at one end. Like someone built it, meant it to stay. But I knew that path. I'd been on it more than once. There had never been a cabin, ever. It sat maybe 30 feet off the trail. I didn't hear anything. No smoke from the chimney, no footprints in the dirt. The ground around it looked undisturbed, pristine. I stood there midway on the path, just blinking at it, decided I'd keep walking and make a note later. Let someone else sort it out. 10 minutes later, maybe 15, I saw it again. The same cabin, same patchwork roof, same drooping porch beam, sitting there like I'd turned a page and the image just repeated. But that made no sense. The trail is nearly straight. No loops, no forks. It just runs down to the fire road where my truck is parked. My head spun. I tried every rational thought I could muster. Maybe someone built two similar cabins long ago, mirror images. Maybe I hadn't noticed the first one clearly, but that felt flimsy. My heart pumped hot in my chest. I considered trying another trail, but I just stood there wondering what was real. I crept forward, dropped to a squat, and peered through a grimy window. Inside, I saw a rough wooden table, bare except for one ceramic mug. Nothing else. No lights, no writing, no blankets, no rusted cans. Just that table and the mug. That was enough. I forced myself back onto the trail, walking faster, faster. My boots hit harder, crunch, 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 as if I could stomp out the thought of that cabin. I stared at the path like it might spit me out into daylight if I just kept going. The trees finally broke into a clearing. I exhaled. Light leaked through the branches. The sounds of forest night moved just beyond. And there, in that clearing, the cabin again. I don't know how else to say it. It was the same cabin, same patchy roof, same sag, same window shape, only this time, leaning against the doorframe was a stick, a twisted piece of pale birch. The exact stick I had kicked or maybe propped earlier when I noticed it on the trail. I knew that twig, and there it was, leaning on the cabin in plain sight. I froze. Every thought turned to ice. My hands locked around my jacket strings. I wanted to bolt, but the forest felt thick and hard-edged, like I'd punch through and fall into nothing. The cabin kept pulling me in. I stepped forward, onto the porch. My boots thudded heavy on the boards. I gripped the door frame and tilted the door open. Inside, the air was stale. Not rotten, just sealed tight. The same table, the same chair, but now the mug. Potion, it was filled with water. Clear water, cold enough that condensation clung to the ceramic. Not cloudy, not murky. It looked like it had been poured from a tap minutes ago. That broke me. I backed away so fast I almost toppled off the porch. Then I ran. Into the underbrush, into chaos. Branches ripped at my arms. Thorns shredded my pants. My shoulder strap tore through canvas. My water bottle hit the ground behind me. I didn't look back. When I burst out onto gravel, I dropped to my knees. I gulped air like I hadn't breathed in minutes. My chest heaved. The forest went quiet. I looked behind me. Only trees. No clearing, no cabin, just silence. I climbed into my truck and shut the door. My hands shook too badly to turn on the radio. I sat there, engine idle, until my breath slowed enough to drive. I didn't say a word, just steered away from that ridge, every turn swallowing down that memory. The next morning, when my heart stopped pounding, I told another ranger, only bits of it. That I'd seen a cabin on the service trail, even though maps showed nothing. He squinted at me, eyebrows raised, but agreed to hike it with me that afternoon. Maybe it was just an old hunting shack nobody knew about. We hiked it together. I walked every step, dragging my gaze through the woods, waiting, expecting. But we found nothing. Not even the impression of a foundation, just dirt, roots, ferns, and me feeling smaller than the day before. He said maybe I was tired, dehydrated, stressed. I nodded and smiled weakly, but I knew what I saw. That spring, my startup finally hit a lull, just enough breathing room for me to take this trip I'd been postponing for ages. I wasn't aiming for anything grand, no guidebook trails. No Instagram-worthy summit selfies, no mingling with strangers on group hikes. I just needed silence. I wanted to hear my own footsteps, the whisper of the wind, maybe the scrape of dry leaves, and nothing else. So I found a listing, a rustic cabin somewhere up a narrow service road branching off the highway near Renfield. The photos were grainy, like they'd been taken from a fading Polaroid. The description promised peaceful seclusion and an unplugged experience. I clicked book on impulse, imagining myself alone with thoughts, maybe with one of those paperbacks I never get around to reading. When I pulled in late Friday afternoon, the cabin looked exactly like the pictures. A sagging roofline, a porch that seemed ready to lean farther one day, and a single wooden chair perched like a sentinel. The metal key box was exactly where the host said it would be, screwed into the siding. Finding it made me feel oddly triumphant, like I'd picked the lock on a secret hideout. Inside was stripped down in the simplest way possible. One room with a wood stove, a bed that looked like it came from a college dorm liquidation sale, and mismatched chipped mugs and plates stacked on dusty shelves. Firewood was piled in the corner, clearly split, but damp and heavy to the touch. The air smelled stale and unmoving, like bottled time. I dropped my bag, switched off my phone, and almost thought, yes, this is perfect. Around 4 o'clock, I decided to stretch my legs. Not aiming for a specific route, I headed toward the faint trail behind the cabin. No markers, just beaten dirt and old boot tracks. It felt comfortably worn. I told myself I'd go until I ran out of trail or ambition, whichever came first. The climb was easy enough, gentle, winding through trees, reaching toward the sky. After 15 minutes, I stepped over a split tree trunk lying across the path. Moss was crawling up the broken stump, and one jagged branch pointed upward, as though frozen mid-gesture. I walked on, but 5 minutes later, the same sight blocked my path again. Same tree, same crooked branch. I stood there, heart thudding a little faster. I tried to rationalize. Maybe I doubled back unknowingly, but I hadn't. Frustration and fatigue mixed inside me. I turned around. The way back took almost no time. 5 minutes, maybe less. I should have been back up the trail in 20. Seeing the cabin appear so soon felt like skipping chapters ahead in a familiar novel. I wanted to laugh at how absurd it was, and I did, softly to myself, but the unease stayed. I shook it off. Driving and low energy were playing tricks, nothing more. Inside again, I coaxed a fire from damp logs and heated water for noodle soup. I sat with a paperback, one of those beach sail thrillers that always sit on my shelf until it's too late. As the sun dipped, shadows swallowed the room until every corner was painted in black. Isolation seeped into the floorboards. At about 9, there was noise. I froze. It wasn't a footstep, more like dragging, a slow, deliberate scrape through dirt or underbrush. It circled the cabin once, then paused. I held my breath, heart pounding. Maybe it was animal, maybe a deer, or something bigger. I told myself that, but the rhythm was off. It slowed, then silence. My legs felt rubbery. Eventually, I forced myself to open the door. Nothing but dark silhouettes in the clearing, silent trees standing as if waiting. No movement, no rustle. Just that kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Morning brought light and false courage. I pulled out my phone and opened the compass app. Today, I decided, would be different. I'd walk straight uphill. I marked a heading and kept at it. No drifting, no second guessing. I pushed through brush and uneven ground for maybe 30 minutes, glancing at the compass every few steps. My legs reminded me I wasn't on a treadmill but grounded in real trails. I expected a ridge or a view, something. Instead, the trees cleared, and there it was, the cabin. The one I'd just left, standing there like a startled friend. Same slumping roof, same single chair, same rickety metal key box. I hadn't deviated, I hadn't gone downhill. Logic hit a wall. Inside, my heart thudded so hard I felt it behind my teeth. I rushed to the bed and sat, gripping the edge. Breathe in, out, control. Then my gaze drifted to the shelves. They'd been barren yesterday, coated in dust. Now one plate had a smear, like someone brushed ash across it. One mug smelled faintly of coffee, that clean, bitter scent of something freshly made. I hadn't poured coffee. The rest of that day was spent staring at the shelves, waiting for something else to shift or change. I thought the dishes might shuffle, that new prints might appear. I avoided the door. I paced the floor. I practiced breathing again. Night came, and with it, that noise, dragging, slow, methodical, right outside the wall. It circled, and this time it sounded different, intentional, like something was searching or testing. It stopped at the door, then a rattle, metal shaking. The key box, a sharp knock, soft but clear, or an interrogation, a check. Are you still there? I didn't move. Couldn't. My breath was trapped, knife in hand, knuckles white. Then silence, no sound, like whoever or whatever wanted verification and found none. The dragging slowly drifted away, leaving me in brittle quiet. Daylight seeped through the window. I didn't think. I shoved clothes into my bag, everything. I left the dishes untouched. I sprinted to the car, turned the key, and bolted down the mountain roads. I just didn't want to see that cabin again. My cousin Jamie had been talking up this hike through the Strathmore Range for weeks. He called it a mental reset, a chance to clear our heads in nature. I'm not much of a camper, but the idea of pushing my limits intrigued me. Then, like clockwork, the week before we were supposed to go, he bailed. Family stuff, he said. He sounded apologetic enough. I waved it off, told him it was fine. But inside, I felt that prick of unease. I should have canceled. I should have admitted that solo overnight camping wasn't something I'd ever done, that maybe I was in over my head. But the time off was already approved. The gear was bought and stacked in neat piles by the door. The route was printed and taped to the fridge, pins already marking where I'd camp, where I'd stop for water. I told myself I could handle it. Just 2 nights alone, no big deal. That's how I found myself at the trailhead early in the morning. The kind of emptiness there tricks your brain into thinking you're lost. There was one old truck, parked far off the path. Rusted doors, peeling paint. Someone had parked it once, then vanished. I stepped out, breathing in the cool air, and signed the logbook, a formality. A statement that I existed there, that I was starting something deliberate. I set off slowly, adjusting my pack straps. First step forward, no immediate regret. The forest was quiet and still, but not oppressive. Just calm, roots wove through the dirt like old fingers. The air hovered damp and green-scented. I noticed every small thing. The creak of a branch underfoot, the faint rustle of something high above in the canopy. For a while, it was lovely, peaceful. Then the quiet began to press on me. No fellow hikers, no voices, no dogs pulling at leashes, just me and the crunch of dirt and leaves under my boots. It was like the world had paused, and I was only an echo. That's when the trail markers started to feel strange. White blazes. I'd memorized them. Simple rectangles spaced out so you knew where to go. But one tree had 3 stacked marks, thick and dripping white. I stopped, tilted my head. Maybe maintenance. Maybe someone messed up. I sighed inwardly. You're being ridiculous, I told myself, and I moved on. Another tree not long after the same. 3 bright marks, oddly deliberate, like someone was making a statement instead of guiding. I started to notice other things. The trail seemed to loop quietly, familiar in a way that made me pinch my temples. I chalked it up to fatigue or the strange geometry of hills. Lunch felt urgent. I stepped onto a flat rock just off the path. My breath came too fast, but I blamed the climb. My GPS flickered when I tried to check. It lit up, just long enough to show that I hadn't moved. The little blue dot was still where I'd been 20 minutes ago. My heart pounded. That isn't right, I thought. But the signal could be weak here. Mountains, interference, all that. I shoved it away and swallowed the unease. I started walking again, picked up the pace, purposeful, not panicked. But it felt like something small was moving behind me. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. Then I saw them footprints. At first, I thought they were mine. But the spacing was wrong. Closer steps. Lighter pressure. Someone, or something, had echoed me. Step for step, but different. I looked back. My footprints were there, but something else trailed just behind. I looked ahead. The prints continued. My heart kicked up. I didn't run, but I moved with purpose. Fast, head down, every muscle alert. The path kept looping. Trees looked the same. And every time I saw a white blaze, I held my breath, only to find the triple marks again, shining like they were fresh. Then I saw it, my water bottle, lying on the trail. Same model. Same crack from when I dropped it on my apartment floor. I reached back to check mine. It was clipped to my pack. Cold. This one was warm, hand warm, palm sweating warm. I dropped it like it burned and bolted. By late afternoon, my legs felt like lead. My lungs were on fire, but I kept moving. Stopping wasn't an option. I found a tiny clearing, pitched the tent in half light, and tore open a freeze-dried dinner. I ate mechanically, as if chewing could convince me it was real food. My hands shook so badly I dropped crumbs into the grass and didn't bother picking them up. I left my boots outside, like every guide said to, and zipped myself into the sleeping bag, trying to silence my racing thoughts. I woke in the dark to absolute stillness, until I moved, and felt the weight of something hard against my leg. My hand touched leather and hard plastic. Boots, inside the tent, laced in perfect double knots. I stared at them. Those knots were precise, deliberate, not mine. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I ripped everything open, packed like someone fleeing, didn't look back. Shoved my feet into the boots without lacing, dumped energy bars and bottles into the pack, and exploded into the black night. The headlamp bounced like a pulse in the darkness. Every stride felt urgent. The world blurred. Blazes flickered past, some simple, some triple. Paint so wet it glistened in the beam. I don't know how far I went. Miles, I'm sure. My knees ached, my lungs burned, my vision blurred. But I kept going until I saw a thin slice of dawn bleeding through the trees. When the forest ended, I stumbled onto a cracked, barely maintained road. Relief hit me like a wave. I just stood there, panting, afraid to feel anything more. Then an RV came around the curve, battered and chugging along. A couple leaned out the window, waving. "You okay?" they asked. Their voices were soft, concerned, calm. I nodded. Told them I got turned around. That was all. They drove me to Harper's Point, a tiny stop with a gas station and a cafe. I sat outside on a shaky metal chair, sipping lukewarm cocoa, waiting for my hands to stop trembling. I stared at the silent street, hazy, ordinary, like nothing had ever gone wrong there. I worked at a small trail center tucked into a stretch of the Appalachian Loop, mostly covering the evening shifts. It wasn't thrilling work, but I liked it well enough. Quiet, steady, peaceful, in that way only forest jobs can be. My main duties were simple: lock up the center, make sure hikers had signed back in, walk the nearby loop trails to check the posted maps. Just keep an eye out so no one was lost out there as the sun dipped behind the trees. I'd been doing it all summer, same routines, same routes, same faces asking for trail info or snack bar hours. I could walk the entire ridge loop with my eyes closed and still know every twist in the gravel. That night was supposed to be like all the others, nothing out of the ordinary. I was finishing up just before dusk. The sun had slipped low, and the sky was fading into that muddy blue where you can't quite tell if it's still evening or already night. I zipped my jacket, clicked on my flashlight, and started the last sweep up the ridge trail. Usually, even on quiet shifts, I'd see someone wrapping up their hike, stretching on the bench, snapping a photo at the overlook, adjusting their boots. But that night, not a soul, no hikers, no distant voices, no signs that anyone had even been on the trail that day, aside from the names I'd checked on the register. The trail felt empty, but not in a peaceful way. It was like I just missed everyone by a few minutes, and the air hadn't reset yet. I shook it off and kept walking. The overlook is less than half a mile from the junction. I'd walked it 100 times. It winds gently uphill, hugging the ridge, before it opens up to a small rest area. Waist-high railing, simple bench, a plaque pointing out the peaks. That evening, I could see the overlook ahead of me, not far, 30, maybe 40 steps. I figured I'd be there in under a minute, but I wasn't. I walked on, boots crunching gravel, flashlight beam flicking over the path, same steady pace. But the overlook never got closer. At first, I thought I was tired. Maybe the fading light was tricking my depth perception. So I picked up the pace, arms pumping, breath louder, still nothing. The overlook stayed fixed in place, like it was tethered to me. I could see it. The bench, the plaque, clear as day, but I couldn't reach it. I stopped walking. Stared hard. My chest was tight. I turned around, thinking I'd backtrack and reset. But behind me, the trail was smooth, unbroken, no junction, no fork. It had been there earlier. I'd taken the lower path up, like always. Now, nothing. Just one blank trail running back into the dark. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of it. Took a few steps back, looked for markers. Nothing was different, but everything was wrong. Then, suddenly, without transition, I was at the overlook. One moment, halfway there. The next, my flashlight lit the plaque. The railing cold against my hand. And the view was wrong. Instead of rolling ridges fading into the valley, there was something else. Directly across the cliff face, carved into the rock, was another trail. An exact copy of mine, same curve, same width, same bend in the path just ahead, but different. No railing, no bench, no plaque, just a bare trail running parallel to mine, perched impossibly on the opposing cliff. I leaned closer, gripping the railing to keep steady. It wasn't a reflection, not a trick of light. It was solid, real, wrong. And then I saw the footprints, stamped into the dirt of that other trail, perfectly spaced, marching forward. They were mine. Same tread, same stride, same direction. Fresh, crisp. No scuffing, no weathering. Just a clean line of boots heading deeper into the dark. My grip tightened. I counted them, compared the spacing. They weren't just similar, they were identical. Step for step. The same number I had just taken before the overlook snapped me forward. I froze, heart hammering. For a moment, I thought if I blinked, I'd be over there standing in those tracks, looking back at myself. But I stayed put. I turned away. And when I looked back down the trail, the fork was there again, Two paths, one toward the cabin, one looping back to the center. Normal, ordinary, like nothing had happened. My flashlight trembled. I didn't bother to steady it. I headed straight for the returning path. Fast. I didn't run, not exactly, but I wasn't strolling either. Every muscle was ready to bolt. I kept my eyes on the gravel, refusing to glance up at the ridge where that other trail might still linger. But even with my eyes down, I heard it. Not footsteps exactly, more like echoes. A delayed version of my own steps. Just a half beat behind. Crunch, crunch, pause, crunch. My skin crawled. I kept going, pushing harder, until I saw the glow of the cabin lights. I didn't trust they were real until I stood close enough to read the number on the door. I threw it open, locked it. Saturday against the wall, lungs burning like I'd run miles. I stayed there until morning. I didn't leave until the sun was high enough to burn the shadows from the trees. I told myself I'd dreamed it or misremembered. Maybe I was exhausted. I was 32 when it happened. My friend Jonah had a cabin way out in the Appalachian Mountains. His family owned it for years, though nobody really went up there anymore. He offered it to me after I told him I was burnt out. Said it had been sitting empty forever, but it still had the basics. Some dusty old cookware, a cast iron stove, a couple kerosene lanterns, a metal framed cot, and a pile of chopped wood tucked under the porch. He called it primitive but quiet. That was enough for me. I needed space. No phones, no screens, no talking. Just a few days of actual silence. The trail started just past a narrow gravel pull-off on State Route 216, not marked on any sign. It wound into the woods right away, and after 10 minutes, I lost signal. No bars, no dots. Perfect. Except the hike was a beast. Jonah had made it sound like a casual walk, but it was all incline. Switchbacks stacked on top of each other like the trail had something to prove. My pack didn't help. It was overloaded with food. Instant coffee, a half dozen books I wouldn't end up touching, and this overly optimistic little hammock I'd brought along thinking I might nap in the woods like some peaceful forest monk. By the second hour, I'd stopped pretending I wasn't lost. The trees pressed in like they'd grown tighter since I started, and more than once I turned around, just instinctively. Nothing behind me, of course, just quiet, not even birds at that point. My shirt stuck to my back. I was convinced I'd overshot it when the trail finally dumped me out onto a flat shoulder. And there it was. The cabin looked like it was leaning into the mountain, but it held together. One room, patched roof, windows clouded with grime. The kind of place that smelled like old nails and forgotten metal. Inside, it was dim but dry. The stovepipe looked solid, and the lanterns still had a bit of fuel in them. I unpacked, made rice and beans on the stove, and sat there barefoot with my feet stretched out, watching the lantern cast twitchy shadows on the walls. That first night, I slept weirdly hard. The cot wasn't comfortable by any means, but I was so wrung out from the hike that I didn't care. What got me, though, was the dark. Not just the absence of light, but the kind of dark that makes you question your own eyes. No glow under the door, no horizon line. Just this thick, cold black, like the world outside the walls had been erased. I woke up jittery the next morning. Not scared, exactly, just restless. I ate oatmeal out of the pot and stared out the window for a while before deciding to go check out the area. I'd passed what looked like an old, overgrown trail on the way in, a narrow break in the trees that dipped down the ridge. Turned out it had once been a logging road, maybe even used in the 70s. The dirt was cracked and sunken, but the path was still there if you looked close enough. I followed it. About an hour in, I saw something off. Mud, fresh, and boot prints deep, recent, headed downhill. They weren't mine. The tread pattern was different, boxy and symmetrical, the kind you see on work boots. The edges were clean too. Someone had passed through recently, maybe within a day, maybe less. For a second, I felt a weird kind of relief. I wasn't totally alone, maybe a hunter, maybe a hiker who knew the area better than me. But then I noticed something odd. The prints weren't heading up toward the cabin. They were going down into deeper woods. No sign of a turnaround. No cross prints or scuffs. Just a straight line, like someone walking with purpose into nothing. No road down there. No homes. Just dense forest. I don't know what made me follow them. Boredom? Curiosity? Probably both. I wasn't expecting anything more than maybe spotting some old camp. Instead, the trail dipped sharply and funneled into a shallow gully hidden beneath a snarl of vines. That's where I saw it. A narrow cut in the rock face. A cave mouth, no taller than a man, maybe 3 feet wide. Almost perfectly vertical. Cold air poured out of it steadily, with that wet stone smell, like a basement that's never dried out. I stood there, just listening. No wind, no bugs, no birds, just silence. Even the leaves didn't move. And the boot prints? They stopped right at the threshold. No smudges on the lip, no heel drag. Like whoever had walked down there had stood in front of it and vanished. I didn't go in, not even close. I backed up slow, kept my eyes on the cave, and turned around only once I was climbing back out of the gully. I didn't like the way the air felt on my skin down there, like it was pressing inward. Back at the cabin, I tried to write it off. Probably an old mine, or a root cellar, long forgotten. Still, I triple-latched the door that night. I didn't sleep through. At some point, just before dawn, I woke up needing to pee. I reached for the lantern but changed my mind. Figured I'd just step outside real quick and not blind myself with kerosene fumes. I pulled the door open, barefoot, and stepped into the cold. That's when I heard it. From the tree line no more than 30, maybe 40 feet away, something screamed. High-pitched at first, like metal shearing. Then it dropped into a long, wet growl. It sounded painful, not like something in pain, but like pain itself had been given a voice. It stopped abruptly. Just cut off. I couldn't move. Then I bolted back inside, slammed the door, fumbled the latch, and practically fell onto the cot. My legs were shaking so hard I knocked over the empty pot by the stove. I sat there in the dark, holding my boots in my lap, staring at the door like something might start turning the knob. When the sun came up, I circled the cabin. And that's when I saw the prints. Bare feet, human-shaped but off. Too wide, toes spaced too far apart, and every step sunk deep, like whoever or whatever left them had serious weight. They came from the woods, curved around the porch, then disappeared back into the trees. I didn't pack. I should have. But I didn't. I spent the day pretending I was fine, scrubbing the already clean pan, refolding my clothes, reorganizing my pack, telling myself it was probably just some rare animal. Bobcats scream, right? Foxes too. I repeated that like a mantra, but I couldn't shake the image of those wide toes pressed into the earth. That night, I didn't even bother lying down. Just sat at the edge of the cot, waiting, watching the lantern without lighting it, listening. It came just past midnight. A sound slammed through the cabin. Not outside through it, like some massive machine was buried beneath the ground and had suddenly started tearing itself open. It was metal on metal, loud enough to rattle the glass in the lantern, loud enough to make the nails in the wall creak. I could feel it in my chest, like pressure instead of sound. And outside, chaos. Birds screaming, wings flapping, the whole forest flailing like something had exploded underground. Then it stopped. Silence dropped again. Sharper, if that's even possible. Like the world had been vacuumed out. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. The second the sky turned gray, I started throwing things into my bag. Didn't fold, didn't check. I left a whole unopened can of beans in the sink. I just had to leave. On the trail back, I passed the place where I'd first seen the boot prints. They were gone now. In their place were more of those barefoot impressions, wide, toe spread, deep, headed straight down toward the gully, toward the cave. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe until I saw my car. My legs were burning, my lungs raw, but I didn't care. My buddy Brian had been on my case for years, trying to get me to join him on one of his backpacking trips in the Appalachians. He's the type who gets excited over topo maps and carries bear spray just in case, like it's a personality trait. Every time he came back from one of those solo treks, he had some strange tale to share. Stories about broken down cabins that weren't on any map, voices that came from nowhere, or meeting people who seemed to live out there full time. He always made it sound like part survival challenge, part ghost story. For a while, I brushed it off. Hiking, for me, meant a walk around the neighborhood, or maybe a weekend trail loop with an iced coffee afterward. Not this deep woods, vanish from GPS kind of thing he loved. But eventually, after enough beers and relentless pestering, I gave in. He told me we wouldn't be doing any of the popular trails. If you want to understand the real trail, he said, you have to get away from where the Boy Scouts and Instagrammers go, whatever that meant. We set out on a Friday morning in October. The air was cool and dry. The trees were just starting to tip into their fall colors. He picked a trailhead a few hours out from a tiny town called Whitlow Gap. The place had one diner and no cell signal once we drove past it. We parked near a gravel turnout, locked the car, and hoisted our packs. I carried 3 days worth of food, which already felt optimistic. He had 4, just in case. That should have tipped me off. We didn't see another person after the first hour. Honestly, I liked that part. The silence was strange, but refreshing. No engines, no leaf blowers. Just our footsteps, the creak of tree limbs, the occasional snap of a twig. The trail began well marked, but it grew faint the deeper we went. At one point, we crossed a crumbling rock bridge over a dry creek bed, and from there it felt like we weren't on a trail at all. Brian didn't care. "This is how you know you're close to something good," he said. We pushed into a pocket of dense timber that looked untouched for decades. I could just barely make out a track. It felt more like instinct than any official trail. I asked if this was still on the map. He smiled, tapped his head, and said, "Better than GPS." By the time we stopped to make camp, I was done. The clearing we chose was about the size of a backyard, surrounded by huge oaks and poplars. The ground was strange, lumpy, and uneven, like something had been buried there. In places it felt soft, almost spongy. I asked if the spot was safe. Brian looked around and said, "Yeah, this place is perfect." I didn't love it. The way the trees arched overhead felt claustrophobic. But he was already rolling out his sleeping pad, and I wasn't in the mood to argue. We set up the tent, then he went to refill water from a spring, and I started collecting firewood. He was gone a long time, too long. Just as I was about to go look for him, he came back. Quiet, something was off. When I asked if he was all right, he hesitated. Then he said he'd found something strange. Out past the spring, another few hundred yards, he'd come across an old chimney, just standing there. No walls, no house, no foundation. Just a blackened 8-foot chimney, alone in the woods. I asked if he took a photo. He shook his head. "Didn't feel right sticking around," he said. "That stuck with me. We cooked dinner, freeze-dried beef stew and instant potatoes." He tried to act normal, cracking jokes, asking if I could still feel my legs. I played along, but both of us kept glancing at the tree line. Later, we passed a flask back and forth, letting the fire burn low. Eventually, the tension lifted. The night even felt nice. Stars faint through the canopy, firelight flickering, the occasional branch snapping in the distance. Nothing ominous. Not yet. Eventually, I crawled into the tent. Brian said he'd stay up with the fire a while. I rolled into my sleeping bag, warm and tired, and drifted off. What woke me wasn't a sound. It was the fact that I couldn't move. It was instant. One moment I was asleep. The next, I was staring at the tent wall, totally paralyzed. Arms pinned, legs locked, chest heavy, like someone had strapped me down. I'd never had sleep paralysis before, but I'd heard of it. That's what I thought it was, until I noticed the figure. Through the mesh of the tent, faintly lit by the dying fire, someone was standing there, perfectly still. At first, I thought it was Brian, but I knew it wasn't. The figure was taller, broader, and it didn't hold itself like a person. No natural slump, no rhythm of breath. Just an unnatural stillness, as if it had been placed there to watch. I tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. My eyes flicked toward the fire. Brian was still there. Slumped forward, hands by his knees, staring into the embers. The figure moved. It didn't walk. It glided. 1 second it was 10 feet away. The next, it was right at the tent. No sound. No crunch of leaves. Just distance covered in silence. Its outline pressed against the mesh head, shoulders, arms. No face, no clothes, just black. A void that swallowed light. The weight on my chest grew worse, like it was pushing into me, like it wanted inside. The tent fabric bowed inward, but made no sound. Then it leaned in. Or maybe it didn't move at all. Maybe it just projected itself forward, like pressure rolling over me. I felt it sink into my skin, into my breath, like I was inhaling it, like it was filling me. I wanted to scream. I tried. But the only sound was the strained wheeze of my lungs, and then gone. Like someone cut a wire, it vanished. The weight lifted. I shot upright, gasping, throat burning. I threw the tent flap open and collapsed into the cold dirt, heart pounding. Brian jumped up, startled. He stared at me like I was insane. I asked if he'd been near the tent, if he'd seen anything, heard anything. He swore he hadn't moved. Said I'd been quiet until the moment I screamed. I checked my watch, 2:04 a.m. The woods were silent. That kind of silence that feels like something is listening. We didn't sleep again. I sat by the fire, clutching my water bottle, while Brian sat next to me, clearly rattled. We barely spoke, just waited for dawn. When the sky finally lightened, I told him I wanted to leave. He argued gently, said it was probably a dream, that we hadn't even reached the best part of the trail. But then he looked at my face and stopped. We packed up quickly. No breakfast, no coffee, just tore down camp and left. The further we got from that clearing, the easier it was to breathe. Like something had let go of me. We didn't speak for the entire hike back. When we reached the car, I got in without looking back. Brian shut his door, sat there for a moment, then started the engine. He still teases me sometimes, says I bailed on the best part. But he's never once mentioned the chimney again. Not once. And I've never asked. It's been 5 years. I've never gone back to the Appalachians. Haven't even looked at that section of the map. That summer, I was working a seasonal maintenance job way out in the Appalachian Mountains. My friend Jasper had landed a contract taking care of a bunch of old cabins scattered across the hills. Some were so remote they didn't even show up properly on GPS. He needed an extra hand, and I needed rent money, so we struck a deal. He handled the scheduling and paperwork. I did the grunt work, and I made the long drives. It was decent work. Not hard, just time-consuming. Most of it was routine. Drive to each cabin, check the locks, sweep out fallen branches or leaves, patch up a loose board or a sagging step. Occasionally there'd be a busted window or signs that someone had camped out without permission, but nothing dangerous. The real challenge was the driving. You could spend 3 or 4 hours getting from one place to another. Some of the roads were little more than deer trails, dirt and tire tracks weaving between trees with cliffs on one side and drop-offs on the other. Half the time, my phone read no service from the moment I turned off the main road until the moment I came back. Most of the cabins were forgettable. You get there, do your checklist, maybe snap a photo if something needed repairs, then move on. But one week, I noticed a name at the bottom of the list that I didn't recognize. McBride Hollow. It was written in smaller print than the others, almost like it had been added last minute. No notes, no repair orders, just the name with a vague set of directions. I even asked Jasper about it the night before. He just shrugged and said, "Should be fine, but if anything's weird, skip it and let me know." Famous last words. By the time I made it there, the sun was already disappearing behind the ridgeline. I remember glancing at the clock and thinking I'd screwed up the timing. I didn't love starting a new location with barely any daylight left, especially one this deep in the woods. The path to McBride Hollow was barely a road, just two ruts in the dirt that snaked up the side of a hill. The truck bounced and rocked the whole way, and I kept waiting for the sound of a tire popping. My hands were clenched so tight on the wheel that my knuckles hurt. Eventually, the trees gave way to a clearing, and the cabin came into view. It didn't look totally abandoned, but it was close. The structure still stood, but the wood had turned that faded, splintery gray you get when it sits too long in the elements. The roof sagged near the middle. Half the porch railing was either missing or hanging loose. Grass and weeds had grown tall and dry around the base of the steps, brushing against the boards like they were trying to reclaim the place. There was a wooden sign nailed to a post near the steps. Carved letters, rough and uneven, but still readable. McBride Hollow. I cut the engine and sat there staring. There was no wind. No bugs, no birds, nothing. Just this heavy, still quiet that felt off. Not like the usual quiet in the woods. It felt intentional, like the whole place was holding its breath. I grabbed the maintenance kit and stepped out. The truck door creaked louder than it should have when I shut it, and the sound felt unnaturally loud in the stillness. As I walked up, I noticed the front door wasn't even on its hinges. It was leaning against the frame, like someone had propped it there just to give the illusion of security. Next to it, taped unevenly to the siding, was a piece of paper. The rain had warped the corners, but the writing was still bold and clear in thick black marker. "Check around back." I froze. None of the other cabins ever had anything like this. There were never handwritten notes. Jasper never mentioned anything. And who exactly was I supposed to be checking in with, around back? I stood there for 30 seconds, debating whether to turn around. But I'd come all this way. The whole point was to inspect places that hadn't been looked at in a while. I told myself it was probably just a note left for a utility worker, or maybe a previous contractor. Nothing sinister. So I walked around the side. The grass was up to my knees in places. Branches had half rotted into the dirt. The back of the cabin looked even worse than the front. The siding had gone dark with moisture and mold. The door was completely webbed over. Big, thick webs, the kind that stick to your face and make you regret every choice that led you there. The doorknob was rusted, streaked with flaky orange patina. I hesitated, then knocked. Once. Then again, louder. No answer. I waited, listened, nothing. One more time. I knocked hard enough that my knuckles stung. Still nothing. I was about to leave, already turning back toward the truck, when I heard it. Voices. From inside. Not just one, two, maybe three. Muffled, fast, like they were arguing just on the other side of the wall. I couldn't make out words, only the sharp, tense rhythm of it. I froze. That kind of freeze where your body locks in place, but your heart pounds so hard it feels like it's trying to escape your chest. I leaned in, trying to catch a word, a name, anything. Then I heard something else, behind me, a slow, steady crunch in the grass. I turned, throat tight. A woman was walking out of the woods, slowly, deliberately, like she had been there the whole time, just watching. She was older, maybe late 60s. Her hair was long, way too long gray, and blonde ropes hanging all the way to her waist. She wore a stained nightgown, torn along one side, barefoot. Her feet were filthy, cracked and bleeding, like she'd been walking for miles through brambles. She stopped when she saw me. Her expression shifted, confused at first, then alarmed, then hard and angry. She pointed at me with one shaking hand. Her voice cut the air like a blade. "Oh no, 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 honey. You get on. You don't stay here." That's when my body caught up to the situation. My chest tightened. The air felt cold, though maybe it wasn't. She stepped forward. Her voice rose. "Did you hear me, or are you deaf? Fool child, folks, come up here. They don't leave." The certainty in her words shut down whatever part of my brain was still trying to reason. I dropped the box, turned, ran. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if she was following. I just ran like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. The truck was 30 feet away, but it felt like forever. My boots slipped in the grass. I slammed into the side of the truck, yanked the door open, and hauled myself inside. Just as I reached for the keys, I heard it, a heavy crash. I turned. The front door, the one that had been propped up, was flat on the porch, and someone was coming through it. A man, older, gaunt. He moved with an awkward limp, but somehow he was fast. Too fast. He was already crossing the porch, arms out, yelling, "Stop! Don't you run off! Stop!" His voice was rough, broken, like he hadn't spoken in years. I jammed the keys in, turned them, floored the gas. The truck screamed to life, jerked forward, tires spinning in mud before finally catching. Branches scraped the sides as I tore down the path. I didn't care. Let them scratch the paint. Let them break the windows. Just get me out. I didn't ease up until the road leveled out and I saw the faint porch light of a neighboring cabin. Just a flicker, but it felt like a lifeline. Back at base, I filled out the report like always. Wrote everything. What I saw, what I heard, the woman, the man. My name's Callan. I'd done a fair amount of hiking over the years. Not the kind where you snap scenic selfies and head back to the car before sundown. I mean real hiking, the kind where you put your phone away and disappear for a while. Usually I went with friends, or at least gave someone a heads up, but this time was different. I didn't want company. I didn't want conversation, and I sure as hell didn't want to be found easily. So I went solo. I picked a trail in the southern end of the Raspine Woods. Barely marked, barely known. Not one of those popular routes with signs and safety rails. This one wound up along Hartfield Ridge, then ran into paths the Forest Service had stopped maintaining years ago. That was the appeal. I wasn't trying to disconnect from the internet. I was trying to get away from everything. People, noise, expectations, to life itself. I packed enough food and water for 2 nights, light otherwise. Tent, stove, first aid kit, and a physical map that had clearly been folded and unfolded by a dozen hands before mine. Still better than trusting GPS out there. The first few hours were uneventful. Just quiet forest and the crunch of my boots on dirt. Nothing but trees and silence. It felt good, meditative. Around mid-afternoon, I found a clearing tucked between 2 ridgelines. It wasn't perfectly flat, but open enough for a tent. The ground was soft, no signs of other campers. I pitched the tent, stashed my food the right way, then took a short walk before dark just to loosen up my legs. The trail past the clearing was marked with faded blazes on the trees. But something about them bothered me. At first, I couldn't place it. Then I realized the spacing. They were stretched too far apart, like someone had tried to maintain them but never checked the distances. Or maybe the trees had moved. Sounds strange, I know, but that's how it felt. I shrugged it off, told myself I was overthinking it, probably just tired. On the way back, though, it took way longer than it should have to reach camp. The trail didn't loop, it didn't fork. Yet every step felt like I was climbing uphill, even when I wasn't. I kept checking for familiar landmarks, the rock outcropping, the leaning tree, but nothing looked right. Then, as suddenly as if a switch had flipped, my camp was just there. Same spot, same setup, like it had been waiting for me. I laughed it off, even though it wasn't funny. Maybe I'd looped the wrong way. Maybe I'd been walking in circles, easy enough to do in dense woods. I made a simple hot meal, then crawled into the tent. But I didn't sleep much, couldn't settle. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but I kept waking in short bursts, like my brain refused to shut down. Something felt off. Sometime past midnight, I stepped outside. No flashlight, just the pale glow of the moon leaking through the branches. The fire had burned down to ash, but I could still see the trail nearby, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, bare, human, deep enough that the heels and toes were clear. They weren't mine. I'd been in boots all day, and I hadn't stepped there since I'd arrived. They came down the trail, directly toward my tent, and stopped 10 feet away. I froze. My skin went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the night air. I stood there for a full minute, scanning the woods, ears straining. Nothing, no wind, no movement. I backed into the tent and zipped it shut, like that thin layer of nylon could protect me from anything. Saturday, upright, flashlight in hand, eyes locked on the entrance. Nothing happened. Not a single rustle. Eventually, around dawn, I dozed off for maybe 20 minutes. That was all I managed. When I woke, I started packing. My hands shook. Sweat dripped even though the air was cold. Every part of me was on edge. I abandoned the idea of staying another night. The trip was over, but the trail out didn't match the one I'd come in on. At all. The bends were wrong. The elevation felt different. Landmarks were missing, no broken log, no mossy boulder where I'd eaten lunch the day before. I checked the map, double-checked it, but it didn't help. The trail markers had changed. Some were missing. Others had appeared where I swore they hadn't been. I told myself to stay calm. Worst case, I'd backtrack. At a fork I didn't remember, I chose the wider path. Looked well-worn. More traveled. I walked 3, maybe 4 hours. Then the trail curved, sloped down, and I stepped out into the same clearing I'd camped in. Same angle of sunlight, same scuffed ground. And worst of all, my tent poles were still sticking out of the dirt. I had packed them. I knew I had. But there they were. I didn't curse. Couldn't. My stomach dropped. I just stood there, staring. This place wasn't just disorienting. It was changing, rearranging, folding in on itself. I didn't eat, didn't rest. I jammed everything into my pack, crushing half my gear, and forced myself to keep moving. Trail or no trail, I walked and walked. No direction, just away. And still, the footprints followed. Not mine, always barefoot, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead. By late afternoon, I heard something new. A clinking noise, metal on rock. Light, distant, steady, like something being dragged in rhythm with footsteps. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I waited. Nothing. I started walking again, slowly. It returned. Step, clink, step, clink. It matched me. That broke something in me. I didn't think, I just ran. Sprinting through the trees, ducking under branches, barely watching where I stepped. I tripped twice. My legs were cut up, my face streaked with sweat and dirt. I didn't care, just kept running. And then like the world had reset, I was back at the clearing. Again. Same spot, same poles, same crushed grass. I dropped to my knees, couldn't breathe. My whole body shook. The forest was dead silent. I pulled out the map, hoped maybe I just read it wrong, but it was wrong, skewed, trails twisted in impossible ways. Some lines didn't connect. Others doubled back into loops that hadn't been there before. I gave up, threw it in the dirt, tossed half my gear, carried only what I could hold in my hands. Then I started forcing my way through the brush. No trail, just trees and undergrowth. Branches slapped my face, brambles tore at my legs. I stumbled more than I walked, but I didn't stop. I whispered to myself, over and over, like a mantra, just keep going, just keep going. Then the ground changed. The softness of forest floor gave way to gravel. I fell onto it, completely spent. It was a road. I don't know how long I lay there. 5 minutes, half an hour. Then the light shifted, and I heard the sound of a truck. A ranger's vehicle rolled into view. Old. Mud splattered. Real. It slowed. The driver leaned out the window. "You lost?" he asked. Not unkindly, but with suspicion. I tried to speak. Only a choked breath came out. I pointed back toward the woods. "I need to get out." That was all I could say. He nodded. Didn't ask questions, just opened the door. The truck rumbled down the mountain. With every mile, I felt something release its grip on me. I never told him what I'd seen,